Hi everyone, I'm Christopher Smith. I'm over in the chemistry department. We do, of course, group work in chemistry because we have our labs, right, which is the sort of main source of group work. We try to do group work in lectures as well, try to sort of have students work in pairs or in groups to work on different types of questions and things like that. And so some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today will be from that perspective, right? Half of the session today might be on developing the grading rubrics as well. So when we get to the grading rubrics part, I'll sort of just do an intro on grading rubrics and then move more to focus on grading rubrics applied to group work, since the first section will be on group work. Okay? As we start off, I wanted everybody to start off with a group work activity so that I can sort of see the dynamics that everybody's going to work in groups, right? Just so that we can talk about those dynamics afterwards. So I'll give you a few minutes to sort of look at these questions here and work as a group, and then I'll look at group dynamics and we'll sort of move on from there.
Let's say Ryan is 8, and then
Okay, ding, 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 ding. If everybody can move on to the second one. There's a second question there as well. So I'll give you a few minutes to work on the second question now, right?
Husband, mother,
that's his sister, Amana.
Right? Husband, so this one as a husband.
Yeah, so that's his brother-in-law.
Mother-in-law is mother of Ryan.
Only mother-in-law. Who's the mother-in-law?
All right, we're going to sort of wrap up the group component now, right? And I'll go through the different groups, and then I'll sort of ask each group what happened, and if somebody from the group can tell me what your answers were, okay? So we'll start with this group here. Can someone from the group tell me what your answers were and what happened?
For the first one, we couldn't complete it. We didn't get to complete the math part of it, which is pretty much the answer. For
Okay.
the second one, grandmother.
Okay, you figured it was the grandmother. Did everybody agree that it was the grandmother?
Yeah. Seems to be that.
Yeah.
Seems to be. Okay. For the second group, can you tell me what happened and what your answers were?
For the first one, we figure out the Ryan's age is 8 and Charlie's is 32. The second one is mothers of his father. I mean grandma, but grandma in mother's side and the father's side is different.
Right, sure. Oh, okay, I see. Okay. So the grandmother on which side?
In father's side.
On the farther side. Great. Okay, great, super. So the answers were, y'all were correct for both of them, right? So for the first one, Ryan was 8 and Charlie was 32. And then for the second one, it was the grandmother, okay? Now, if you didn't get the answers, don't feel too bad about it, right? Because these are Mensa quiz challenges, right? And so the Mensa people, they put out all these hard sort of mind-twisting sort of things. So if you didn't get it, don't feel too bad about it. If you want to look at more challenges like this, the source that I got them from, if you fly on American Airlines, there's the American Way magazine, right? And in the American Way magazine, they always have these Mensa challenges. You can look online and you can look up their catalog of Mensa challenges, but they're really, really interesting sometimes and really, really neat sometimes, okay? Since we did a little bit of group work, it wasn't very much, but I'll go over the roles that are sort of normally present when you do group work, right? For these roles, if you're working with groups, you can either assign these roles to different members of the group if you want to set it up like this, or you can sort of see how the roles evolve, okay? Once I go through the different roles, you can tell me where you see yourself being in terms of the group, right? So the first role we're going to look at is this one here, right? The gatekeeper / the group leader, okay? So this person's role in the group is mainly to keep the group on task and make sure that people aren't floating away in other directions and that everybody's sort of contributing to the task, right? When you work in groups, who's normally the group leader, like from your experience? Are you guys normally the group leaders in your group, or how does it work?
I am. I'm horrible.
Bob is normally the group leader? Okay.
I take over. Poor Claudia's worked with me before. And you're like, yeah, she's horrible.
I think as a teacher, always the
Okay, but if it's not a teacher, like if it's a group of students, so if you're the teacher within the group of students, then you're going to be the leader?
Yeah.
So you're normally the leader?
I don't know.
Okay. But if it's a group of people, like with the instructor just sort of standing over there in the corner, do you find yourself normally the leader of the group?
Sometimes.
Sometimes? Okay. Do you find yourself no? Somebody else had said yes to it. You do as well? Okay. Why do you think you guys are normally the leader? What is it that causes you to be the leader?
Well, for me, is when I start hearing the other comments or what everybody else is saying, I don't want to maybe get opinion more.
Okay. So you sort of bring things together. Okay, good. So that's one of the roles. And again, if you're working with groups, like if you want to assign your students to a group, you can assign them to have these roles formally if you want to have a formal group structure so that everybody knows their roles. Or you can sort of do it informally and let the roles evolve as you go on, right? If you're starting a new class, it just sort of depends. I mean, if it's a graduate class, then people normally assign themselves sort of informally and then maybe it'll work out. If you're working with undergraduate students, you might want to assign groups just so that everybody has a clear vision of what their responsibility is, right? If you're teaching high school and middle school, for sure, I think it's a good idea to assign the roles, just so that everybody knows what it is that they're supposed to be doing, right? One of the other roles is here. It's the facilitator, right? And so the facilitator is the one making sure that everybody's involved and that everybody's participating, right? And so if somebody's sort of over there looking out the window, then the facilitator would sort of bring them back and say, you know, don't look out the window so much. Can you come and please do something, right? So sometimes if you're a manager type of person, then you might find yourself in the role of facilitator. If you're assigned as the facilitator, then for sure you should take on that role, right? Any facilitators amongst us? No facilitators? These roles aren't necessarily distinct, right? Like sometimes somebody's a group leader and a facilitator, so they're not necessarily distinct. You can have more than one role.
It kind of depends on the situation. Sometimes some situations might call you to be a facilitator, some might call to be a leader. It depends on what's done. Because there's no really, I can be a little bit of both. It depends on what.
Right. Okay, right, depends. Also with the facilitator and these different roles, they might sort of merge and shift from week to week, right? So if you're doing a semester-long project, maybe the same person is not going to be the facilitator the whole semester, right? Maybe this week somebody will take it on, another week somebody else will take it on, right? So if you choose to let your groups work like that, that's fine if you see that it's working out. If it's not working out, the groups aren't working out. If people are just slacking off the whole time, there's nobody bringing the groups together, then you have to make steps to assign different roles to different group members, right? What I normally do is I just see how it works out, you know. Then if it doesn't work out, within a few weeks, then I start, you know, saying, okay, you do this, and then you have this role, yeah. One of the other roles is going to be this one here, the mediator, right? So your mediator in the group is going to make sure to take care of conflicts that arise and differences of opinion, right? Because normally when you have people working together, everybody isn't going to be on the same page, right? Everyone's going to have a different opinion. And sometimes people are more vocal about their opinions, and sometimes people are more aggressive, and sometimes people just sort of squeak out their opinion. So you want to make sure that when people have differences of opinion, you can sort of take care of that and work cohesively as a group, right? Again, not necessarily distinct roles, but there should be somebody being a mediator at some point in time, right? Normally in a group, there's going to be a recorder / secretarial type of person, right? So they're going to record the information and make sure that it's legible and make sure that everybody remembers what happened so that when you meet again, you can give a recap and sort of go over what happened last time, right? It's not a menial role. It's a very important role because if you have a big meeting and nobody remembers what happened, then when you get together the next time, you're going to spend 3/4 of the meeting trying to figure out what you did the last time, right? So this is a real important role, and this is one of the roles that I would recommend assigning even if you don't assign the other roles, right? There's going to have to be somebody to record the information regardless, you know? And if nobody thinks to do it, then you're going to have a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted energy. So this role for sure I would assign to somebody, or make sure that it's rotating or something. Make sure that somebody acts as the recorder each week, right? There's this role here as well, the timekeeper, right? And the timekeeper just sort of makes sure that things are done in a timely manner, right? So for instance, if you have a group and you're supposed to do a literature review by the end of the 3rd week of the semester, right? By the 2nd week, you know, you should be prodding and poking people, making sure that different people are getting their different parts together. Because guaranteed, if you wait and don't say anything, and the third week rolls along, nobody will have done anything. Like, that's just how groups work a lot of times, you know? And so if you don't have somebody poking people saying, okay, this is due, this is where we're supposed to be at, then you're going to find that nothing much has happened, right? And then it's going to get stressful, and then people are going to go to the professor and complain, and it's not going to be good. A lot of times when you go to the professor and complain, the professor says, well, you know, you have to work it out as a group, which you might not view as being really helpful, and sometimes it's not that helpful, but it depends on the age of the students and the level of the students, you know. If it's graduate work, then normally, you know, we'll say work it out, you know, amongst yourselves, unless it's something unworkable, you know, yeah. One of the other roles is going to be the reporter role, right? Like I just asked, you know, I asked somebody from each group to tell me what happened in the group, and so I suppose that whoever was the one who spoke up would be the reporter from the group, right? Some people are naturally more inclined to sort of report on the results and summarize them versus others, you know? And so normally there's going to be a report in the group. Normally you don't have to assign this role, I find, because normally there's somebody who's willing to say something, you know, at the end, right? And so normally you don't have to really assign it that well, yeah? If, as you're going along in your group and you're finding that the reporter is not effective at reporting, then you might want to take a stand and assign it to somebody else, you know? Because somebody might feel that they have a lot to say, but maybe it's not that substantial, right? And so if you're working in a group and you find that, then maybe you might want to assign the reporting duties to somebody else. If it's a group where things are not formally assigned by the instructor, then the instructor might just let you flail and sort of sink until you figure it out yourself, you know? So you have to monitor yourselves as a group, I think. You sort of have to look back and think, am I doing effective work? You know, is each member of the group doing effective work? And things like that. But if you're assigning groups for your own classes, then this, again, might not necessarily have to be assigned, but it might be a good idea if it's not working out at the beginning, right? Then the last member of the group frequently is going to be your freeloader who does nothing, right? Because oftentimes you find that there's somebody in the group who's just not contributing very much, missing meetings, always has some sort of excuse, and just not doing much, right? There's different ways to deal with the freeloaders, and the freeloader aspect is one of the main reasons why people tell me a lot of times that they don't like to work in groups, you know? Because people are always like, well, there's always going to be somebody who's not doing anything, and they're going to get the same grade, et cetera, right? How do you all deal with the freeloaders in your groups? Because I'm sure everybody's worked in groups, and I'm sure everyone has had a freeloader. So can you tell me some of the things you've done to deal with them?
Yeah, do you like track them?
You keep track?
Yeah, it's like, what do you think? Kind of running both of them.
Okay.
Delegate an assignment, something simple that you know they're not going to get stuck in and not want to do it.
Okay.
Polishing off the final words.
Maybe reviewing or editing or printing for everyone or making copies.
Oh, okay. So you assign them something so that they'll contribute, but nothing that...
Nothing to where they'll get stuck and they won't do it because it's too complicated.
Okay. Right. Okay. Because if you assign them something critical and something really important and they don't do it, you know, then it's a problem, right? Or if it's somebody when you're supposed to do a group presentation, if they're unreliable and then they don't show up and they're a critical piece, then that's a big problem.
Correct.
Okay. What have other people done to deal with the freeloaders?
Oh, pretty much the same. Like we were both saying, but I mean, of course, you can also talk with the person. You know, make sure they understand that everybody needs to, communicate the same. Everybody needs to work the same. You know, it's all an equal opportunity for the whole team. You know,
right?
Okay. And to follow up, make sure the freeloader understands that when the time for the grade is, that if you still could have that attitude, your grade will be severely as worse as the ones who participate. They're going to get the credit, and your grade will be totally different.
Right. Okay. Now that's a good point, depending on how the grading is set up, right? Because sometimes the instructor sets it up where the group members can evaluate each other, and that counts as a component of the grade. Sometimes it's not the case, right? Like sometimes the instructor just assigns the grade themselves, right? Right, you're right. Or not even one grade for everybody, but the instructor, like all the grading comes from the instructor. It could be the case where everybody shares the same grade, or it could be the case where different people have different grades, right? So if you are able to evaluate your peers who are in the group, I think that's great, you know? I've tried that before in group presentations, because I run a seminar class where people have to do literature reviews and then present on it, right? And my experience was that sort of across the board, everybody gave everybody else 100, you know, because they're all their friends and they'd all been studying for 4 years together, and everybody just gave everybody 100, except for one person who gave everybody like a 40, because she didn't like anything that anybody did ever. So neither of those cases was that useful for me, you know. So I did that for maybe 2 years, and then after that I just stopped letting people evaluate one another because it didn't turn out to be super useful. Every now and then I think about going back to it, but for right now I just focus on people themselves. Yeah. For me as well, when I'm looking at group presentations, I make sure to let them know at the beginning that each individual is going to get their own separate grade, right? So it's not an overall group grade, because when they're up there presenting, I can tell who's done stuff and who hasn't done stuff. You know, like if somebody is sort of looking shifty and just looking over at the corner and out of a 20-minute presentation talks for 2 minutes, then to me it means they haven't done very much, right? And so of course then their grade is going to be a lot lower, right? And so once everybody understands these things from the very beginning, then I found that that's pretty useful. Right? So for these different roles, I would recommend just sort of if you start off not assigning roles, you know, then make sure to monitor each group. And if each group is sort of working out okay and there's a clear leader and everybody's contributing, then maybe you can let it go as it is. If you start off with unassigned roles and it's not going okay, then I think you have to sort of step in and then start assigning roles, you know. Again, for younger kids, middle school kids and high school kids, or maybe undergraduate freshmen, I would assign the roles from the very beginning. I think that's probably a good idea, just so that everybody has a really clear idea of their responsibilities towards the group. If it's older students, you know, like maybe seniors, then I think you can just sort of start it off and see what happens. Yeah, I think so. That's kind of what I would recommend. Okay. Any questions or other main comments or anything like that about group work? Yes? Sure.
Sorry. I just had a comment. If you're not given those defined roles, and then as the group work develops, I've had situations in the past where that I've had a professor kind of tell me to pull back so that the others can get their feet wet because they're being a little unparticipatory.
Okay, great.
However, I personally struggle with that because the end product is what I've always got in my head. So I worry that if they're not going to pull their weight, we're going to present something really crappy. And so I find it difficult for me personally just to know when to pull, how far to pull back. Like when you're sitting in a group setting, how often should you be contributing? And it's horrible that I need a number for this, but I need some kind of, because otherwise I dominate. I'm just one of those A personalities, and I tend to dominate if given the opportunity.
Right. Okay. In a group setting, I mean, if there's a question that's tossed out there, you know, and everybody's just sort of looking at their feet and not really saying anything, then I think it's fine to jump in, you know. Once you jump in with your opinion, for sure there should be conflicting opinions, I think, because even when you have two people in a group, I mean, not everybody's going to agree on the same thing at all times, right? So once you give your contribution, then I think it's always fair enough to ask around and say, you know, what does everybody else think, or does anybody else have any other different ideas, right? So as long as the opportunity is there for people to contribute and to say something, then I think that's fine. If people choose not to contribute and it looks like that's how it's going to go, then I think you keep on contributing. Because you do have to have a product at the end, you know, and if your product is going to be subpar, it's just going to be really stressful because you can see it coming like a big train, you know, it's going to end up being a subpar product at the end, and you don't want that. Some people don't care, like some people really don't care what the product at the end is going to be. But if you're somebody who does care, then you do have to take a certain amount of initiative and make sure that things go forward. Yeah. So I think the main thing is communication. If everybody has a chance to contribute and to communicate, then I think nobody can really say anything at the end, you know, right? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. How
do you manage when you have too many leaders?
Too many leaders?
Yes.
Right. If there are too many leaders, then you can sort of divvy up the tasks, you know. I think you can say, okay, you can take the lead on this aspect and you can take the lead on that aspect, you know. Because if there are too many leaders, then the project isn't going to be unified and it's not going to go in one particular finite direction. It's going to go over there and then over there. And
yes, because I have that problem that one person wants to do something, another person wants to do something, and they all want to their way.
Right. If you have two major opinions that are sort of evolving, then you can take a group vote as well, you know. So if you want to do like an anonymous vote or however you want to do it. But for a project, you have to you almost have to commit early on to one direction. Because if you don't commit early on, then things are fuzzy and nebulous and hazy. And then you have 1 week left to hand it in and you don't have a clear idea of what you're going to do. And that's really stressful as well. Yeah. And so I would say, like if there are 2 clear directions, and 2 people sort of pulling in opposite directions, then one thing to do is you can take a vote, and then whatever the vote of the group is, then you can go in that direction. Because that's democratic, everybody has a say, nobody feels slighted or left out or whatever. And so I think that's a good way to go.
And you should mention about having too many leaders in a group. It kind of made me think that not everyone can lead in the same talk. Not all leaders are managers. Not all managers are leaders. So I like how that kind of sums it up.
Exactly. That's very, very true. Yeah, that's very true. Those are very nice comments and questions. Yeah. Any other major contributions?
Now you mentioned about those roles, but let's say there's 5 in the group. And how many of those you?
There were maybe 6 or 7, right? But again, some of the roles can overlap, right? So you don't necessarily have to assign one role per person, So for instance, somebody can be the timekeeper sort of and make sure that things are done timely and be the recorder, Because if somebody's the recorder, then they have a very good sense of globally where the project is going and what benchmarks you've reached already. And so that would be a naturally good person to be the timekeeper, I think, Yeah. And so some of the roles can definitely overlap, right? That's not a problem at all. Yeah. I think that's a good idea. When you get groups that are too big, of course, then almost by default there's going to be 1 or 2 people not doing much when it's just too big. Because I think effective groups are maybe 5 to 7 people, something like that, right? When you get groups of like 8, 9, 10, then there are going to be some people, who just aren't going to be there. They're not going to show up. They're not going to communicate. They're not going to do much because they sort of think that everybody else is going to contribute, right? Even in chemistry lab, when we work in the lab, I try to work in pairs, just groups of 2. Because when you have a group of 4 in a chemistry lab, there's almost not enough to do where you need 4 people doing stuff all the time. And so the one who's by default going to not do much anyway, they're just going to just sit there on the counter and really not do much, And so in chemistry lab, people do assign different tasks. Sometimes people get assigned to mix solutions. Sometimes people get assigned to wash the dishes. But there's always some person in the group who's assigning things because they look around and they say, well, this guy over here isn't doing anything. Let me give them something to do. And so naturally it sort of evolves, even in the chemistry lab. So it's cool. All right, super. So that's the first main part where we're looking at group work. We're going to get into a little bit of rubric stuff now. And with the rubrics, I have a journal article review that I want everybody to take a look at. This would be, for instance, like one entry in an annotated bibliography, right? And so I want everybody to grade this out of 25. 25. So assign it a grade out of 25. Okay? 3, 4, 5, 6. It's on chemophobia, which is the fear of chemistry. Because a lot of people seem to fear. So I'll give you a few minutes to read over it and then assign it a grade out of 25, and then we'll sort of see. Okay, the timer's just gone off. Ding, ding, ding. So I'll go around the table and I'll ask everybody what grade you assigned out of 25. Okay? Do you want me to start over here or over here? Okay, we'll start here. So your grade out of 25, what was it?
20.
20? Okay.
Yeah.
I put 15. I thought I needed a little bit more input for my opinion.
Okay, 20, 15? 15?
10.
10? Okay. 10, all right.
Yeah, I'm just so 24. I thought it was one.
24?
Yeah,
You're a pushover. That's fine, that's fine. Okay.
I do 20.
20?
Because the review kind of described what the author did and and the result, but not the reflection thoughts on it. So
okay, great. Okay.
I gave an 18 out of 25, kind of pretty much the same reason as you just said. I found, you know, just for me, in my opinion, some sentence structures.
Right.
And then, I mean, I know it's supposed to be a brief article review, but I would have liked to see a little bit more detailed information, especially about on the on the methods.
Okay, right. Okay.
I gave it a 19, and unlike some other colleagues, I noticed in the way the person wrote their citation, you're only supposed to capitalize the first word, and he capitalized most of the time, and I saw that. And then also on that second line, you got to move it over at least four to six spaces.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was my big. And in the last sentence, this is an interesting concept. Semicolon, he could have made that a period and started and say, in my opinion. But you don't have to say, in my opinion. He should have reflected and provided more evidence as why the chemophobia exists at the high school level.
Okay. And you agree?
That's 15 also.
15 also.
Just get a eventually a little better, you know,
Okay.
better flow.
Should have been better. Okay.
Better understanding.
Okay, so the grades were a pretty large range. They went all the way from 10 for the low folks to 24, right? So that's a really large range. What I'll do now is I'll hand out an actual rubric, right? I got this from online, and the website is here. It wasn't actually for articles, it was for books, but I just adapted it for articles. So what I'm going to do is hand out this rubric, and then I'll have you regrade it based on the rubric, and then we'll see what your grades end up with at the end as well, okay? Super. Okay, 16, okay, there you go. All right, so we'll go around and we'll have each person say their original score and then the regraded score. Okay.
The original was 20, and now we graded 19.
2019? Okay.
Yeah, 19.
My original 15, now it's 11.
15 and 13. Original 15, we graded 13.
10 and 13.
10 and 13? Okay.
10 and 11.
Okay.
24 and 19.
Okay.
20 and 13.
Okay.
18 and 13.
Okay.
Original was 19, and now the rubric is 13 now.
Okay.
Yeah, 13 and I had 15.
Okay, all right, good. So a lot of people, it sort of came and became a lot more focused, right? It's clumping around the 13, 12, 11 sort of mark, which is one of the big benefits of having rubrics, right? If you're teaching 10 different sections of the same course, if students in the same course have wildly different grades, then there's going to be a big problem, right? So you want to make sure to have a rubric so that everybody knows exactly what you're looking for, what you're going to be evaluated on, and everyone's on the same page, right? That's one of the giant benefits. I'm a big fan of sharing rubrics with students, so whenever I have a grading rubric, I'll share it with the students and let them know what I'm looking for, right? I don't think you should have it as a secret for yourself and then be like, oh, surprise, I was looking for this, when the students didn't know, right? So if you do have a rubric, something detailed like this, whatever you have, I think it's always a good idea to share it with the students, right? Different students are going to ignore the rubric. They're going to focus on certain parts. They're going to have overall quality based on the type of student they are anyway. And so even if you share it with them, it's not going to drag everybody to the top, but it'll give everybody the same chance to get to the top, right? Okay. I'll do a very, very quick run through of some of the slides that I have about grading rubrics, but you've seen here that one of the main things is that they're really useful in communicating information of what you're looking for and what the students should do, right? So this is mainly what it is, a set of guidelines for students in terms of how they're going to be graded and what you expect as the instructor, okay? The main point is that you're going to have fair and consistent grading. I'm sure all of you have experienced students coming to you asking you questions about why I got a lower grade and my friend over here got a higher grade, right? That happens all the time. So if you have your grading rubric, you can just pull it out and you can say, well, you're deficient here, 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 and here, and so that's why you got the score that you got, right? So grading rubrics are very, very super useful, right? They communicate different things, breakdown of how the grades are going to work, right? So in this grading rubric, there were the 5 sections that you were looking at. There was a format, content, summary, analysis, and conventions, right? And so students know that you're going to look at those 5 different sections. That's important to know because if you just tell them to write an article review, they're not going to know what you're going to look for, right? So you want to tell them the different sections that you're going to emphasize, right? Technical criteria as well, right? Number of words, number of pages, things like that. That's important as well, and that's some of the things here. Like one of these, in the content here, one of the things was that the article is written within the last 10 years, right? You might think that students should obviously get more recent articles, but not everybody thinks the same way, right? And sometimes there's a foundational article that was written 30 years ago, and students would want to include that, right? But if you do emphasize that you're only going to be looking at recent articles, then at least everybody knows not to include articles that are all 25 years old, right? Citation styles, again, this one here talked about MLA format, right? So students need to know if you're going to be looking at MLA format, if you're going to be doing AP, if you're going to be doing Chicago style or whatever else is out there. And everybody in different fields is going to have their own formatting style. So you want students to know what you're expecting of them, right? Also, you want to know what potential penalties are, right? If they hand it in late, if it's supposed to be a 10-page paper and they write a 5-page paper, things like that. That was one of the questions I had. If you ask students to write a 10-page paper and they turn in a 5-page paper, my thoughts on that normally are that it's half of what it's supposed to be, so the maximum they can get is 50%, right? What do y'all think about that?
Yes. Sounds good.
That's right. Okay. So make sure that that's somewhere in the grading rubric, right? Because I never say that, you know, like I never say if you turn in half of the work, you're going to get automatically 50% off, you know. But every semester there's somebody who turns in like 3 or 4 pages when it's supposed to be a 10-page paper. And so what I do is I normally just reduce the score right away, but I've been thinking maybe I should give them a heads up that that's going to happen, you know. I mean, I'm not sure what somebody expects when they turn in a 3-page paper and it's supposed to be 10 pages, but maybe they don't expect it to be that bad, you know, and so maybe I need to include that somewhere. That's something that I don't include right now, but maybe it's something that I will include, yeah. I think that's fair and I think that makes sense, but students don't sometimes think so, yeah, and they get angry and upset, yeah. I'm going to zip along a little bit because I have a bunch of examples here. But I wanted to zip along here to the group work section since we started off with group work. These are some questions you have to think about when you're making up your grading rubrics if you're going to have group work, right? Do all members of the group receive the same grade? What has your experience been? Do you assign all members of your groups the same grade, or what do you think about that?
I think depends who does what. If like that freeload, that grade should be different.
Should be lower, right?
Yes. But you have to consider that's something that if you have 4 people in the group and everybody does their shit, they all should get the same.
And how would you evaluate the contribution of each member?
Monitoring, and if someone reports to me, the professor, what's going on, okay, I'll take that into consideration. If someone in the group reports to me that we have someone that is not in the group, I say thank you for the report. I'll get that.
Okay. So would those be informal reports, like if they're exasperated and decide to come to you, or would you have a formal mechanism built in where they sort of give an evaluation every 2 weeks?
Well, if they come to me and tell me, and if you write it up, and I'll look at it and I'll speak to the person. Right. Okay. There's a way you have to be discreet about it.
Right. Okay. Okay. What do y'all think about having the formal evaluation, like? I mean, they talk about summative evaluations and formative evaluations. What do y'all think about the formative evaluations as the project is going on, of the group members evaluating one another? Do y'all believe in that? Is that something you would do?
Mm-hmm. I think it depends on how big the project is.
Okay. Say it's a half a semester long project.
For sure, the group evaluation should be applied because it's important. But if like 5%, 3% presentation, right, just give the group the whole like the same.
Right.
Score.
I see.
Or another one is one point that I included in group work is the collaboration. So I think that's going to be something in the rubric for group presentation in that group work answer.
So basically you're saying collaboration is importante as far as the grade is concerned. Collaboration.
How would you evaluate that collaboration yourself?
For collaboration of the group, I give like 10% of
But how do you evaluate it? Like, how do you, as the instructor, how do you decide that there was 10% worth of evaluation of collaboration versus 2%?
That's for the group evaluation each of them.
Okay, so that's their own self-reports to you?
Yes.
I see. Okay, okay.
I just have a thought because I've taught undergraduates in Mexico, not here, but in Mexico. And the thing is that when they're in the undergraduate levels, they don't know how to work in teams. It's not that they don't want to, or if there is one that just is lazy and doesn't want to work. They just don't know how to do it. So I think we should, part of working in teams is helping them learn how to work in a group.
Right.
I mean, when you're in a doctoral program,
yes.
You don't have any excuses. You've been working in teams for so long that there's no excuse for you not to work. But when you're working with 17 years old, 18 years old, and we want them to work as doctoral students too, and in the beginning, I don't think it's fair. And some teachers, I think, they assume that the students know how to do it. So what I've seen that works in the beginning, especially in the beginning of a course, is not to give each other like a score, because then it happens that everybody's gonna give a 100 to everybody, because they're in the same team and they feel bad for the other members of the team. But just to let them write a comment too, just anonymously, right? Okay. Just a comment, you know, you didn't come to class and you have such great ideas, and it will be important if you show up. But so they don't feel threatened by each other, because if you make them give each other scores like grades, then they're not gonna be comfortable working together, and you want them to learn to work together.
That's a really good
not
point.
to hate it, because then you are in a master's level and you hate working with others.
Right, yes, exactly, right. That's a good point. And that's qualitative feedback versus quantitative, right? If it's quantitative feedback is a number, and then if that number is like 4 out of 10, then that's going to be a problem. If it's more qualitative, you know, like not a score, then you can sort of work on that and adjust it by the time the end comes, when maybe at the end you would do the quantitative feedback, right? So I think that's a good idea. Teamwork is super important. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, THECB, their new rules state that every syllabus for every course has to address how you're going to implement teamwork in your class. So this is across the university curriculum, across all the classes, and so teamwork is becoming super, super important. It's always been important, but it's going to have to be thought about and addressed in everybody's syllabus from now on. And so there's different curriculum committees on campus right now, scrambling, trying to figure out how everybody in campus is going to put a teamwork component and how it's going to be addressed and how it's going to be assessed in their syllabus. And so it's real serious, and so these types of things dealing with teamwork, the more it is and the more experience, then the better for sure. Yeah, super important. So we looked at the self-evaluated, self-reported evaluations as well. What about class member audience evaluation? So if somebody's doing a presentation, does everybody get to evaluate that group, or does just the group get to evaluate themselves and the instructor? What do y'all think?
Mostly on the undergraduate level, the instructors will require those who are not presented to evaluate their peers.
Right.
But on the graduate level, you're not going to see that too often. The instructor will do most of the evaluation. Like for example, I took a course and the instructor evaluated me and my group member and what we did, and I confess I messed up and I suffered the consequence.
Right. Okay.
I suffered the consequence, so I know what it is.
Right. Okay. What do y'all think? Is that how it should be? Should they be allowed to evaluate everybody?
Well, the way I do it in my classroom is one of the readings that we cover is on digital composition and the criteria for evaluating digital composition.
Right.
So when they're actually presenting their whatever their project is, or making their presentation, the class does evaluate the group.
Okay.
And going that criteria, what they're supposed
That's
to
like part of their grade,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And they have to be able to evaluate somebody else.
And then I, as a professor, I grade them by their collaboration or making sure that they all know that everybody has to say something.
That's
Who's in charge of the graphics, who's in charge of the way it's going to look, then I grade that So they receive undivided in two. It's a point system. So the presentation gets one grade as a whole, and then their individual participation.
Okay.
So some may end up with 6 points, some may end up with just 3 points.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. But I think that's cool. Yeah. Because I think once people think about how to evaluate as well, I think that's really important. You know, because if you're just sort of sitting there not evaluating, and then you start to think about how you're going to evaluate, then that triggers something in terms of how you're going to be evaluated as well. And so I think both evaluating and being evaluated are good components. Yeah, I think so. The last question I had, are there any other sort of considerations generally that you would think about if you're doing group work and figuring out how to assign grades?
Well, if you're going to have those who are not presenting, like do the evaluation of their peers, I would require them to make sure you don't put a quantitative, they can do a qualitative report, because you don't want to confuse them saying, well, what my peers grade me this way, and I instructor grades you differently. So let the instructor's grade be more prevalent instead of the peer evaluation. As long as the peers who do peer evaluation, qualitative comments, they'll get credit for their own.
Okay, makes sense. Also, if you did want to have the peers doing a quantitative component, you could just sort of set it up in the rubric that like the instructor's grade would count for maybe 80 or 85% of the student's grade, and then the average of their peers' grades would count for the other 15 to 20%. You know, you can do something like that, so it's less heavily weighted, but it still sort of has an impact. You know, there's lots of different ways to do it, but it just depends on your philosophy and what you think the class would be comfortable with. You can also poll the class at the beginning, you know, because sometimes I poll my class at the beginning and I'm like, well, do you want multiple choice exams or do you want free response exams? Do you want this or do you want that? And then depending on what the majority of the class wants, then we can just go in that direction, you know. Yeah. And so that's something you can do as well. You can sort of poll them and see what they think.
I think in rubrics, and I've learned myself is I added one kind of like effort, because some students, they was limited because they speak English as a second language.
Right, okay,
and they have difficulty in writing and difficulty in speaking also, but they put effort to do it. So I think effort is one important criteria in the rubric.
That makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. And also, I mean, their ideas may have been like really central to whatever the presentation was, and their discussions may have been really central, right? Not just the end product of the presentation, but along the whole process, right? All right, well, I'm probably going to have to run up for class right now, but thank you all very much for coming. If anybody wants to contact me, you can just give a call or send an email or something. My last name is Smith. For a while, I was the only Smith on campus, but I think there are a couple more now. But if you look up in the directory, there shouldn't be too many. Okay? And again, thank you all for coming very much. Thank you.